From Atal Bihari Vajpayee to Manmohan Singh to Narendra Modi, he's seen the world change right in front of him.
Undoubtedly one of the most influential politicians of the world. He's a very compelling and enigmatic figure on the world stage.
The President of the Russian Federation for you. You spoke about strategic autonomy, which is what India has been talking about. Strategic autonomy, decide for India's interests. But has India reduced Russian intake of oil after pressure from the West?
So you're just telling us that in your recent meeting with Mr. Witkoff, it was offered to you that you could make it back to G8 and you categorically said that you are not interested. When you met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in SCO, and there was this picture and video of you and him going in a car, and we're showing it to our viewers right now. You were traveling in a car with him. What did you discuss in the car?
Do you want to go back to being a part of the G8? Because that's a lot, there are a lot of reports on that. So is that something that Russia is looking at?
Dear viewers, hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Aaj Tak India Today and I'm Anjana Om Kashyap and we're at Kremlin today and you're about to witness history, a very historic moment. It is said that when two old friends meet, they have their private jokes. They have a lot of banter, they have a lot of fun, and they have a bonhomie or camaraderie. But the others in the room might feel a little uncomfortable. And why do I say this? I say this because as the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi, the world will be watching very, very closely. Vladimir Putin is undoubtedly one of the most influential politicians of the world whose decisions don't just affect Russia, but numerous nations across the world. He's a very compelling and enigmatic figure on the world stage. It just doesn't get more exciting than this.
Well, that's right, Anjana. Hello and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan. We have with us a man who is known to be one of the world's longest serving leaders. He's seen it all, through wars and economic recessions, from disintegration of countries to a changed world order, from Boris Yeltsin to Donald Trump, from Atal Bihari Vajpayee to Manmohan Singh to Narendra Modi. He's seen the world change right in front of him, and he's taken Russia through very turbulent times and yet has cemented his position as a force to reckon with. Thank you so much, President, for doing this with us. You're in conversation with India Today and Aaj Tak. That's the President of the Russian Federation for you.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on our network. How are you doing?
Надеюсь, что и вам у нас в России.
Well, I do hope that you find it great in Russia, in Moscow. You like Moscow and the Kremlin, where we're working. Well, as you can see, everything is according to plan. On the whole, we're happy with the economic situation. And what's most important, this month, I'm very happy that I'm going to meet, as you have just pointed out, my friend, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We agreed to meet in India a long time ago. There's a lot to talk about because the range of our cooperation with India is very huge. I'm not even talking about history of our relations because this history is of a unique nature. And I would also like to point out that the path that India has traveled since gaining its independence, just over the 77 years, which is a very short span in the scale of history, and India has managed to travel a great way. And I'm going to dwell on that a little bit later. But, you know, when we live our daily lives, we hardly notice the changes that are currently afoot. It rarely happens when we notice these changes. But if we have a look back at the history, we'll see that what transpired in India is, to a large extent, a miracle. Well, I don't think there are many people living in India who know that the longevity, the life expectancy in India over the 77 years has
We
more
will
than
talk about
doubled.
the longevity in some time from now.
Да, хорошо, поговорим обязательно. Но, во
Yes, we're
всяком
certainly
случае,
going to talk about that.
наши отношения
But
с
be
Индией
that as it
развиваются
may,
по
our
очень многим
relations with
направлениям.
India are
Я
developing
очень рад
across different ranges,
возможности
different
увидеться
avenues.
с
I'm very
премьером Моди,
happy to
который
have
нас
this chance to meet Prime Minister Modi,
связывают не только
Yes.
деловые, но и
and not
личные
just business ties, but also personal
May I
ties
ask you,
bring us together.
you just talked about the Indo-Russian ties, and it dates back to almost more than 7 decades. Dosti in Hindi and Druzhba in Russian. This friendship dates back to more than 7 decades. My question to you is, how do you assess the strength of this friendship in today's time? And what would you say about Prime Minister Narendra Modi and to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whom you call your dost?
О премьер-министре Моди.
About Prime Minister Modi,
Yeah?
Ну, вы знаете, мир
Well,
очень
you know,
быстро меняется.
the world is changing rapidly, and these changes are getting even faster, and everyone sees that very well. The world configuration is shifting, new poles of power are appearing, the configuration forces across the world is shifting as well. And amid these conditions, it is very important to ensure stability between great nations. This stability is imperative because it creates a foundation, a solid basis for steady development, both bilaterally and globally. So, in that sense, what we are doing together with Prime Minister Modi is of great significance, which goes beyond our bilateral relations. Moreover, when it touches directly upon our ties. And the thing is, the stability in certain spheres of cooperation is very important because this is the guarantee that we will achieve the goals that we have set before ourselves. And Prime Minister Modi has set before himself, before the government, before the country, enormous goals. Well, let's take Make in India is a great idea. It has practical manifestations even in our bilateral ties. When we meet, he says, let's do this, let's do that, in this field, in that field, let's have a look at this and at that. And I'll be happy to name these fields. So there are many practical avenues of cooperation.
Before Geeta takes on to the next question, one little small, very interesting question, because when you met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in SCO, and there was this picture and video of you and him going in a car, and we're showing it to our viewers right now. You were traveling in a car with him. Was it pre-planned, or how did it go about? How did it happen? And what did you discuss in the car?
Вы знаете, обсуждали текущие вопросы.
We were talking about just the current agenda. It was not pre-planned.
Вышли на улицу, подошла
We
моя машина,
just
говорит, «Слушай, поехали».
went outside into the street, and my car was there, and I suggested that we should get together, just, you know, as a sign of friendship, of comradeship. There's nothing, you know, no complicated orchestration, just as friends. We got together in one car and we spoke. Along the road, there was always something to talk about. And, you know, we had a conversation. We even sat in the car for quite some time. And then I said, yes, we should go because they're waiting for us. But there's nothing special about that. It just testifies to the fact that there's a lot we have to talk about. And these topics are of importance to us.
Right. President Sir, the fact that you're going to go to India, you just said that both leaders are going to cement the guarantees that you give each other. What are the kind of announcements that we can expect? We've heard about technology transfer, we've heard about trade enhancement. What are the solid announcements during this visit? And I ask you this is because the world, and you know who I mean, would be watching.
Ну, то, что мир будет следить за
Well, the
нашим
world
визитом, здесь
is going to be watching. I don't think there's anything special about that. Because, you know, India is a great country, 1.5 billion people. It's a developing economy where the rate of growth is 7.7%. This is the first result in the world. Prime Minister Modi has managed to achieve that, and this says a lot the Indian nation can take pride in. There's all to be proud of. Of course, there are always detractors, critics who believe that this can be done better, but that said, the result is evident. We've got a whole plan for cooperation which covers the most important spheres and fields. The most important ones are certainly oriented towards the future, and one of them is high technology. India and Russia are working together in outer space exploration, in energy, nuclear energy in particular, which is well known because, you know, are one of the leaders in that field, also shipbuilding, aircraft building. We have very many interesting directions which are oriented towards the future. Or let's take artificial intelligence. We'll probably talk about that later. But this is one of the key technologies of the future which is reshaping the world as we speak, because it manages to multiply things many-fold, but at the same time it creates certain challenges to be addressed, and we'll talk about all of that. And as Prime Minister Modi thinks and what I think, well, we'll choose what is of the greatest significance at this stage, and we'll help with that.
Agreement, sir?
Well,
of course, but we should probably not announce them right now because, you know, all of that is going to be announced in the course of the visit. We will present that to the public. And then the colleagues will present all of these agreements to us, and we'll have to give our final approval to these agreements.
We'll now come to the energy sector, yeah.
Okay, just talking about sustainability and trade. There's immense pressure on India and on Russia when it comes to oil. India has suffered in terms of the kind of pressure that we're seeing from West. How can both countries handle this Western pressure and sanctions?
Дело в том, что
The thing
этот
is,
прессинг, который
this pressure you've just
чаще
mentioned
всего использование
is
политических
mostly
инструментов
about using political instruments for simple economic competition purposes. In other words, our energy cooperation with India is not subject to short-term political fluctuations, nor is it connected to the tragic events in Ukraine. As far as hydrocarbons are concerned, our economic operators, the companies, long before the developments in Ukraine had entered into very good, efficient relations based on trust. Trade relations, economic relations. One of our big companies, as is well known, has acquired an oil refinery in India. It was one of the biggest foreign investment into the Indian economy, to the tune of more than $20 billion. Our company is developing this refinery, working with its partners quite successfully too, year in, year out. And India became one of the big suppliers of oil products to the European markets, not just because it was buying our oil at a discount. The thing is, these ties go back years and decades before, and right now some don't like it that India occupies one of the leading positions in the markets thanks to its cooperation with Russia, and they're trying to devise a way in order to restrain India. They're trying to do that artificially, politically, shutting down opportunities for development.
That's an important point to make, but my question to you now would be about defense. And India continues to be the biggest defense buyer. Roughly 38% of the market from Russia is bought by India. My question to you, sir, is in view of the sanctions by the US or the tariffs they have laid on India, the arm twisting methods that are being adopted, and I name it's America. How do you plan to circumvent all this? Will you pull back or push harder?
Но мне кажется, что и Индия, весь мир увидели.
Well, I think both the world and India have seen that one cannot talk to India the way they used to talk to it 77 years ago India is a great power, not an English or British colony, and everyone will have to take that into account. And moreover, the head of the Indian government, Prime Minister Modi, is not one to give in to pressure. The Indian nation can take pride in their Prime Minister. It's absolutely evident Prime Minister Modi has a firm position, which is not, however, confrontational, nor are we going to enter into confrontation with anyone. We are simply trying to defend our legitimate interests, and that is exactly what India is doing. What are the obstacles? There's transactions and payments, but more than 90% of our transactions are carried out in national currencies. There are certain difficulties, of course, because there are intermediaries, but there are solutions to that, because we can transition to using the systems for financial messaging systems, which we have offered by the Bank of Russia and by our Indian counterparts, and we are doing this work steadily. And those who are taking steps to limit the economic cooperation of third parties sooner or later will incur losses. And I think once this understanding settles in completely and fully, then this practice of pressure from outside is going to come to an
specific
end.
questions, sir. Number one, because during Operation Sindoor, the weapons we had acquired from Russia proved very crucial in our victory. And that is why I would like to ask you specifically about S-400, the air defense system, the 5 S-400s that are awaited by when can we expect that? The second question is on S-500, the more advanced air defense system. And the third question, fifth generation fighter jet, Su-57. How are you going to push for this and what's the update, sir?
Well, you're an expert in this field. It's as if we were at the negotiating table on military and technical cooperation. But, you know, if we look a substantive look at that, then I will tell you that India is one of our reliable partners with whom we have the greatest level of trust. We are not simply selling things to India. India is not simply buying things in defense. The thing is, this relation with India is of a different nature, of a different character, and of a different level, and this is something we cherish, just as India cherishes that. We are not simply selling, we're also sharing technology. And this is a very rare case in military and technological cooperation, which attests to the high level of trust between our two countries. And the thing is, there is a wide range of products in shipbuilding, military shipbuilding, missile building, aircraft building. You've just mentioned Su-57, but India also operates other Russian aircraft. Or let's remember the production of armored vehicles like T-90 tanks produced by India, and this is one of the best tanks. And there was also the BrahMos missiles, which we managed to manufacture together with India and which have been manufactured in Indian production opportunities. So make in India by... Well, yes, Kalashnikov, this is also an important weapon, of course, but we are talking about high technology, even cutting-edge technology, if I go as far as to say that. And given the use of certain types of weaponry in combat, their value has increased manifold. And right now, Indian military experts understand full well, given their contacts with the Russian military, what and in what conditions is most efficient, what has to be employed and used and where and in what fashion, and this is of paramount importance for our military and for the experts, and there's this understanding both on the Russian side and on the Indian side.
President Sir, I have to go back to your oil question, because you spoke about strategic autonomy, which is what India has been talking about. Strategic autonomy, decide for India's interests. But has India reduced Russian intake of oil after pressure from the West?
Вы знаете, у нас есть
Well,
некоторое снижение
there
товарооборота в
is a
целом.
certain decrease in bilateral trade over the first 9 months of this year. This is just a minor adjustment.
Ну, торговый оборот у нас
On the whole,
да,
our
примерно такой
bilateral
же,
trade
как и был.
stands
Я сейчас не
almost at
могу
the same
сказать
level as
точно
it used to.
по
I
цифрам,
cannot
там,
cite
по
concrete
месяцам,
figures right now,
но
month in, month out,
торговля
but
нефтепродуктами,
trade
нефтью,
in hydrocarbons,
производство
in oil,
нефтепродуктов для
and oil
для
products
потребителей
for customers in
нефти,
particular
российской нефти в Индии идет абсолютно ритмично.
is
Я
being
знаю
done
состояние
steadily.
российских
I
партнеров,
know the sentiment among the
российских
Russian
компаний.
partners, the Russian
Они считают,
companies.
что
They believe
их индийские
that
контрагенты
their
это
Indian
надежные
counterparts are
и очень
reliable
серьезные люди.
and very serious people.
Right. The other important aspect in terms of cooperation between India and Russia is the nuclear front. Russia has been one of the biggest movers when it comes to nuclear facilities in India. Are we looking at important announcements on the nuclear front? Nuclear today is a sensitive issue for Russia.
Есть. Есть.
Yes,
Ну,
we
как
have
не
some
быть.
announcement to make.
Э,
Of course there are.
Мы действительно один из крупнейших игроков,
Indeed,
как вы
we're
сказали,
one of
но
the
не
largest
игроки, если
stakeholders.
по-серьезному говорить.
Well,
Мы
not
производители
stakeholders, so to speak.
новейшего
We're
и
producers of
самого
the cutting
надежного
edge
в
and
мире
most reliable
оборудования
in the
для
world
атомных
equipment
электростанций.
for nuclear power
Российская
plants.
компания «Росатом»
Russian company
больше
called
всех других
Rosatom
компаний мира
is ranking number one in the world
и строит
in building and
ядерных
producing
реакторов для
of
атомных
nuclear
электростанций за
reactors for
границей.
NPPs abroad.
22 атомных
22 nuclear
Наша
units.
с вами известная станция, известный
The
объект
famous
Кудам-Кулам является
nuclear
одним из лидеров.
power plant, Kudam-Kulam, is one of the leaders in
Это
this regard.
крупные блоки.
These are
Они
large
эффективно
units.
работают
They're
и,
working effectively.
повторяю,
And
за-
I can repeat myself that they have
высшей
proven to
степени,
be
положительны. Но есть и новости,
very
которые
useful.
сейчас спросили.
There are news
Что-
in
что-
terms of
что
what
это
you've
за
been
новости?
asking. What are
Это
these news?
заключается в том, что
The
Россия,
news
единственная, наверное, сейчас
means
страна
that
в мире,
possibly
которая
Russia is
способна
possibly
производить и
one of the countries, the
производит
only country in the world that is capable of producing
электростанции, атомные
and
электростанции
produces
малой мощности.
small
Такие
power
электростанции
plants,
уже работают
SMRs.
в России.
They are already
Причем,
in use in Russia.
значит, мы можем производить и
And
на
actually,
надводном
We can produce them
варианте,
as a land-based
на земле.
option and a
Это
sea
очень
option, a
хороший
floating
вариант,
option. This is a
который
very good
на отдельных
possibility.
местностях
For certain areas, it can be used very
где нет
efficiently
необходимости
when there is no need to
крупной
build a
электростанции
major
или
power
потом
plant
тащить электросеть.
and later
объектов генерации,
bring
которые
transmission lines
А
from
можно
the
достаточно
generation facility
труднодоступных
to the consumer. And you can put such SMRs in hard-to-reach areas.
небольшие
You can put small plants there.
That's a lot of collaboration and cooperation. You're talking about made in India, make with Russia. How do you think President Trump's going to react to all of this?
Вы знаете, ни я,
You know,
ни премьер
neither
Моди,
I
несмотря
nor
на то,
Prime
что
Minister Modi,
мы испытываем некоторые давление
though
со стороны,
we experience certain
никогда,
external
я
pressure,
хочу это
have
подчеркнуть,
never,
чтобы
and I
вы
would like to
услышали,
highlight, I would like you to
никогда
hear
не
this.
выстраиваем
We've
свою
never
работу,
built
работу
our
перед собой
work,
против кого-то.
our joint work against anyone.
У президента Трампа своя
President
политика,
Trump has
свои
his own
задачи.
policy, his
Мы
own
решаем
tasks,
свои,
and we're
не
solving
против кого
our
бы то
own
ни было, а за себя,
issues, not against someone,
обеспечивая свои
but
интересы,
for
индийские
us,
и
ensuring the
российские.
interests of India and
Мы
Russia,
никому не вредим в нашей
but we're
работе,
not
поэтому думаю, что,
hurting
лидеры
anyone
других
with our
государств
cooperation. I think leaders of other countries should appreciate that.
With regard to Mr. Donald Trump, my second question is also about him because recently he also went on to say that if you're buying oil from Russia, you're the one about India, you're the one who's funding the Russia-Ukraine war. How would you characterize Mr. Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America?
Вы знаете, я никогда не даю
You know, I
характеристик
never
своим
give
коллегам.
characteristics to my colleagues,
Даже тем, с
even
кем
to
работал
those
раньше,
colleagues,
уже тем
to
более
counterparts who I used to work
действующим лидерам
before,
отдельных государств.
especially for the incumbent heads of
Оценки
states.
должны давать
And
граждане,
such
которые голосуют
evaluation
за
should be
выбор
given by
руководителя
the citizens who have
в ходе
voted for the
избирательной
leader
кампании.
during the
Что
election
касается
campaign.
покупок или
As for the
покупки
purchasing
энергоносителей
of
у
energy
России
from
со
Russia
стороны Индии,
on
хочу
behalf of
отметить,
India,
я уже это
I would like to
говорил,
highlight that, and I've managed it,
Соединенные Штаты
I've
до
said
сих
it
пор
before
покупают у нас
publicly.
то же
The
самое
US
ядерное
continued to
топливо
buy
для
the
своих
nuclear fuel
атомных
from us for their
электростанций.
NPPs.
Это ведь тоже топливо
That is also fuel energy. This is uranium
для атомных
for
электростанций,
nuclear power plants
работающих в США.
that are functioning in the US. That means that if the US has the right to purchase fuel from us, why India should be deprived of such a right? That is a matter to be studied closely, and we're prepared to discuss that and debate that with President Trump as well.
But you're being very kind. You're saying you do not characterize Trump, but he certainly does to you. Having said that, he has weaponized tariffs, and he's weaponized it against India. Right now, you're engaged, but it's a blow hot, blow cold for India. How do you think the two countries should be handling Donald Trump and the U.S. administration?
Вы знаете, он проводит
You
свою
know,
политику,
he's conducting his own policy,
полагая, и у него есть советники.
and I assume that he has counselors.
Не с потолка берет.
He's not just taking this from the sky. He has advisors who believe that conducting such a tariff policy that has to do with introduction of additional tariffs against their counterparts in the end brings dividends to the US economy, and he does that very sincerely, I believe. Our experts believe that there is a certain danger. However, that's a choice of the country and the leader of that or other country. What kind of economic policy to choose? We've never done that, and we don't intend to do that. We have an open economy, and we hope that in the end, all violations that have to do with the rules of the WTO
Right.
will be
President
amended.
Sir, things have changed a little between US and Russia. The fact that America is engaging you, we would have loved to be a fly on the wall when you were meeting with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. That was an important meeting. Were there red lines that Russia reiterated? What really happened?
Об этом сейчас рано говорить. Я не
It's
думаю, что вам
premature
было
to
бы
talk
интересно
about that. I don't think it would be interesting for you to be a fly on the wall. It lasted for 5 hours. I got bored with it
Но
too.
она была необходима.
But it was
потому что
necessary.
For 5 hours.
5 hours. Да.
Mr. Witkoff
Yes.
and Mr. Kushner.
Да, а я один.
Yes, and I was alone. Imagine that. What a disgrace.
Но если говорить серьезно,
But
то,
if we speak
то,
on a more
она была
serious
очень
note,
полезной.
it was a very useful meeting
То, что нам привезли
because the fact that
американские коллеги,
our US colleagues brought us,
было основано так или
brought
иначе
with
на
them,
наших
it was based
договоренностях.
more or less on
До
our
моей
agreements
встречи с президентом
before
Трампом
my
на
meeting
Аляске.
with President Trump
Мы
in
так или
Alaska.
иначе говорили об этих вопросах.
In this way or another, we've discussed these issues during the meeting in Anchorage. But the fact that they brought to us today, we haven't seen that before, so that meant we had to go item by item. That is why it took so much time. Therefore, it was a necessary conversation. It was very specific, very meaningful.
Okay, can I ask this question this way, sir? Was there a certain specific point where you disagree? Was there a specific point of disagreement where the versus one was just not going forward?
Да. Да, такие вопросы
Yes, there are
были.
issues that
Мы их
there was
обсуждали.
disagreement. We've
Но
discussed
это
it.
сложная работа и
This is
сложная
complex
миссия,
work,
которую
a complex mission that President Trump has taken upon himself. Indeed, I say it without any irony, because achieving
пришли к
that both conflicting parties come to a consensus, that's a complex task.
Президент Трамп действительно,
Indeed,
я в этом уверен,
and I'm sure that President Trump sincerely is trying to do that. Therefore, we went item by item.
и
I repeat that.
говорили о том, что да, это
Somewhere we said that, yes, that is to be
согласиться
discussed.
не можем.
This
Именно в
we
таком
cannot
ключе,
agree with. That was the discussion. That was the manner we talked about. But saying specifically
значит, не подходит,
what
и,
does not suit us or
с чем мы
or
могли бы
what we
согласиться,
could live
мне
with,
кажется, это преждевременно,
I think it's premature at
это
this
может
point,
просто
because this
нарушить
can
тот
simply
режим
disrupt
работы, который
that
пытается
manner of work that President Trump is trying to
этим сейчас
organize.
занимается. Челночная
What
дипломатия.
they're doing right now is shuttle
Поговорили
diplomacy.
с представителями
They've talked to the representatives of Ukraine. Now they've talked to the Europeans. Then they travel to us. Later they have a meeting with the Ukrainians and Europeans again.
Я думаю, что
I think
надо включаться в эту
I think
работу,
they need to
а не мешать.
engage in
So
this
you
work
think
and
the
not stand in the way.
So you're saying the 28-point peace proposal is now not on the table? but there were leaked conversations.
It is on the table. We are discussing it. They simply broken down these 28 and later 27 points into 4 packages.
Okay.
And it's suggested we discuss 4 packages, but in essence, these are the
Go
same
back to that
27
and try
points.
and understand how it's going forward, sir. But what happened in Alaska? You met President Trump, and it was all about the peace deal, right? What happened? Anything come out of it? Did you actually see a clear and sincere intent?
Yes, it was indeed so. We had a feeling, and even more than a feeling. I had no doubt that President Trump has sincere desire. Well, let's not talk about what's the cause of it, but what dictated this sincere desire, but it is there, in place for sure. The United States and President Trump, indeed, they have their own understanding of why it needs to end, and as soon as possible. Incidentally, humanitarian issues, I firmly believe that this is one of the causes, one of the reasons behind President Trump's behavior on that, because he always is saying that, and I'm sure it's sincere, that he wants to minimize the losses. And I'm sure that he also has humanitarian notions about that. But there are other ideas, both political and economic. And I'm sure that the US are trying to find a solution.
Right. He has spoken about intentions. You're right about that. You know, he's claimed to have ended wars. He's been claiming, much to India's disappointment, that he brought about or brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And now he's looking at Russia, Ukraine, he's looking at Israel. Do you really think Trump is a peacemaker?
Well, in case that of the situation in Ukraine, for sure. Yes, I can repeat once again, I'm positive. I have no doubt that he sincerely strives to find a peaceful solution. And I can highlight once again, the United States might have different reasons for it, both humanitarian notions, personally for President Trump, because indeed he would like to the end of hostilities and loss of life. But he could have political interests as well for the end of standoff between Russia and Ukraine, and economic reasons as well, incidentally, in energy sphere, for example, and in other spheres as well. There are many dimensions where restoring of economic relations between the United States and Russia would benefit both countries, both Russia and the United States. He has shown me some letters. I will not be talking in detail about that, but some letters from major US companies to us.
Really? Oh.
Yes. Letters that there are US companies that they exist and they prepare to come back when all issues have been lifted and want to do that, and please don't forget about them. That's on paper. Well, there is nothing so surprising. Why are you so surprised? Many want to come back to Russia. The Indian government are also telling us why should we leave.
For Trump to make the bidding, to come with companies, letters from companies, that's a different ballgame altogether. To do the bidding.
No. You misunderstood me. We have letters from American companies. We already have letters from the US companies that have been sent to us. And they're asking us not to forget about them. They're our partners. They did not leave of their own volition. They're waiting for a political signal.
This conversation is becoming very interesting, sir, because there are so many highlights of understanding it. It's really pleasant to see you and your sense of humor and how you're putting things forth. But now we'll go on to a very serious matter, and that is the Russia-Ukraine war. So what, in your view, would constitute a victory for Russia in the Russia-Ukraine war? What are the red lines? Because you have, and I quote you, you have said very clearly that Russia will lay down arms only if Kyiv's troops withdraw from territory claimed by Russia. Which parts would that be?
Вы знаете, дело не в победе, как вы сказали.
You know, it's not about the
Так
victory,
что
as you said.
Россия
It's about the fact
стремится к защите
that
и
Russia is
обязательно
trying to
сделает защите
defend,
своих
and will do
интересов,
that, will defend
защите
our
своих людей,
interests,
которые
our
там живут,
people who live there,
защите наших
the
ценностей,
defense
традиционных
and
русского
protection of
языка
our values, traditional
и так
values, the
далее.
Russian language, and so on,
Защите, кстати говоря,
and the
религии,
defense of religion,
которая культивируется веками.
faith
Знаете,
that has been there for
Да.
centuries on those territories.
ведь вы знаете, да, что русская
You know
православная
that the
церковь на
Russian
Украине практически
Orthodox
запрещена.
Church in
Отнимают
Ukraine
храмы,
is
людей
basically
выгоняют из
banned.
церквей и
Their
так далее. Вот
requisition in churches and
проблема.
people thrown
Я
out
уже не
of
говорю про
temples.
запрет русского языка.
I'm not even talking about the ban on the Russian language.
Вот это весь комплекс, большой комплекс
That
вопросов.
is the comprehensive set of
Напомню еще
issues.
раз.
I'd like
Не
to
мы
remind you
начинали
once
эту
again,
войну.
we were not the ones who started the war.
Запад потворствовал и
The West
способствовал, организовал
connived
русский
at
переворот на Украине.
Ukraine and
После
organized
этого
the coup d'etat
случились
in
события
Ukraine,
в Крыму, а
later
потом
followed
начались
by the
события на
events
юго-востоке,
in
тогда что
Crimea
Украины,
and later in the
Донбасс.
southeast of Ukraine, then
Мы,
Ukraine,
знаете,
Donbas.
не говорят же об этом.
It's
Мы
not being
8 лет,
discussed. For
8
8
лет
years,
пытались
8 long
решить эти
years,
вопросы
we've
мирным
been trying
путем,
to solve that issue
подписали мирные
through peaceful
соглашения,
means. We've signed it in
Минские
peaceful
соглашения,
settlements,
в
the Minsk
надежде,
Agreement,
что
in
удастся
the hope
мирными
that it will be
средствами
possible to
урегулировать
use
эту
the
проблему.
peaceful means to settle the
Потом
issue.
выяснили, что
Later,
западные
we'll
лидеры,
learn
они
that the
сказали
Western
это
leaders
публично,
who
что
said
они не
publicly
собирались
they've never
выполнять
intended
Минские
to fulfill the
соглашения, а
Minsk
подписали их
agreements,
только
and
для
they
того,
signed them
чтобы
only
дать возможность
to give a
вооружиться
chance
Украине и продолжить
to arm
вооруженную
Ukraine
борьбу
and to
против нас.
continue the armed
Мы
fight against
вынуждены
us.
были через 8 лет
So we were forced,
на
after
уничтожение
8
людей,
years
которые проживают на
of this
Донбассе.
killing of
Никто
people who live
почему-то
in
на Западе
Donbass,
об этом ни слова не
and no
вспоминает.
one is
Вынуждены были
remembering that
начать
in the West.
признать эти
We
республики,
were forced to
а
recognize the
во-вторых,
republics
начать
first,
оказывать им
and
поддержку.
second, we had to
И
provide
наша
support to them.
специальная
And
военная
our
операция
special
это не
military
начало
operation
войны,
is
а
not the
попытка
beginning
ее
of the war.
закончить.
It's an attempt
Закончить
to
войну,
end it,
которую
to
Запад
end the war
развязал
that the
против
West
нас,
has started against
украинскими
us
руками украинских
at the hands of
националистов. Вот
Ukrainian
что происходит на
nationalists.
самом деле.
That is what's
В этом,
happening in reality.
в этом суть
That
происходящей
is the
проблемы.
crux of the matter.
Закончим мы тогда, когда решим,
And we'll end this war when we decide
достигнем цели,
that we
поставленные
have achieved the goals that we have set before the beginning of the special military operation. We'll liberate the territories.
What is the end game for Vladimir Putin in Ukraine?
Так я же сказал.
Well, I've just said it.
Мы признали вот эти...
We have recognized, listen,
Мы 8 лет не
for
признавали
8 years we did not recognize
самопровозглашенных
the
республик.
self-declared
8
republics.
лет.
For
Они
8 years
провозгласили
they
независимость.
have declared the
А мы
independence,
старались наладить
and we were
отношения
trying
между остальной частью
to build
Украины и
relations
этими
between the
республиками.
rest of Ukraine
Потом,
and
когда
these
поняли, что
republics.
это невозможно,
When
что
we
их просто уничтожают,
understood that it's
вынуждены
impossible,
были
that they're simply
признать
being destroyed, we
Причем
were
не
forced
просто
to
их
recognize
признать
them, and not simply
в части территории,
recognize them
в
as
рамках
their partial territory,
административных
but within the
границ,
administrative
когда они
borders
существовали еще в
when they
советское
existed
время,
back in the Soviet times,
а потом во времена независимой
and later
Украины,
during the times of the
после
independent Ukraine,
обретения
after
независимости,
it gained
в рамках
independence,
административных границ.
in the
И мы сразу Украине
administrative
сказали,
limits,
украинским войскам, люди не
lines.
хотят с вами жить. Они вышли на референдум, проголосовали
So
за
the
независимость.
people, the voters,
Выведите свои
came to
войска.
the referendum
И
and
никаких
voted
военных
for
действий.
everyone to withdraw troops from there and not to conduct
Предпочитали
any armed
воевать. Но вот сейчас
actions there,
довоевались.
but they preferred to
В принципе,
wage war. And now
всё к
it
этому
all
сводится.
came to a head, and it all comes to one thing.
Вооруженным путем освободить
Either we do that
эти территории,
through
либо украинские
military
войска
action will liberate the territories, or the Ukrainian troops will withdraw and leave these territories and stop killing people there.
Question, Geeta, before we move to the other one. Just one last question, sir. March 8, 2014, during the annexation of Crimea, you were addressing the Federation Council and you said, Kyiv is the mother of all Russian cities.
Да.
What did you mean?
А вы знаете, здесь я ничего от себя не придумал.
You know, I've never
Так
invented
говорили
anything.
исторически.
That was the
У
historic
нас,
saying.
Российское государство
The Russian
складывалось
state
изначально
was initially
центр.
built from different
Первая,
centers.
первая столица
The first capital,
по истории
according
была
to
в районе города
historical data,
Новгород на
was
северо-западе.
situated around
Потом
Novgorod city in the
оттуда все
northwest.
как бы
Later,
государственность
the
перетекла
statehood
в город Великий Новгород,
moved to
а
the
чуть попозже
state of
э,
Veliki,
значит,
to the
Киев.
city of
И вот это
Veliki,
была
later to
Древняя
Kiev.
Русь.
That was the ancient Rus.
И с тех пор Киев и
And since
называют
then, Kiev was called the mother of Russian cities.
История разворачивалась таким образом, что
Later,
произошел
the tide of
раздел
history turned, and there was a division of the ancient Russian state.
часть этого единого когда-то.
The part of the single
начала
ancient
развиваться
Russian
в центре
state
Москвы.
started to develop with a
Часть
center in Moscow,
попала
and a
на
different part of it
страны, например,
landed with other countries. For example,
часть, где Киев,
the
там,
part with Kiev and
земли,
some other lands.
эти части попали
These
сначала
lands were first
вместе
a
образовали
part,
государство с
well,
Литвой,
they
потом объединились с
had
Польшей,
formed a state with
возникли
Lithuania,
члены
later
И таким образом
united
эта
with
часть
Poland,
древнерусского
was a
государства
part of the
оказалась
Polish state. So that part of ancient Russian state ended in Poland, and in the 17th century wanted to go back to
President,
Russia.
the fact that you're mentioning the history, and it brings me to what I did when the conflict was underway. I had traveled to Donetsk, I traveled to Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and most of the people over there are Russian speaking. They speak Russian language. They were very disappointed with Kiev that it was banned in eastern Ukraine. But they were also a little shocked that how is Putin doing this to us? We are his people. A lot of women I spoke to were in shock. So what do you have to say to people in eastern Ukraine who actually have families in Russia, who on a daily basis move from Ukraine to Russia? So what do you have to say to them?
Ответ очень простой.
The answer is very simple. The thing is, they were living in that part of Ukraine, in Luhansk or Donetsk Republic, that had been under control of the Kiev authorities. But that part of Donetsk or Luhansk
она уничтожалась киевским
region, they had been destroyed by the Kiev regime that were not under their control. And because of that destruction, we had to give our support to those parts of Donetsk and Luhansk that declared their independence. We gave a chance to people to speak their mind during the referendum, and those who wanted to be with Russia, they voted in favor, and those who were against that, they could have easily left to other parts of the Ukrainian state. We didn't.
So what do you make of President Zelensky? He was promised NATO. The European Union promised him EU. Nothing really happened. Was NATO ever on the table for Ukraine?
Когда этот господин приходил к власти, он заявил,
this
что он будет стремиться любой ценой.
Sir came to power, he said that he would do everything for the sake of peace, that he would sacrifice everything, even his career, for the sake of peace. But as you can see in hindsight, it all looks different. Just as his predecessors, he began to be guided not by Ukrainian interests, but by the interests of a very small group of radical nationalists, and he's basically serving their interests. This regime, by its very mindset, is very much similar to a neo-Nazi regime, because there are, radical forms of nationalism and neo-Nazism. This is basically one and the same, almost identical. And right now they're basically waging war. This regime is pursuing war, and it's not doing that well. But as I said before, the most important thing for them is to come to the realization the best solution to this problem is to agree at the negotiating table about what we tried to secure back in 2022. But you have to ask them what they intend to do.
That'll be interesting to see what they have to say on that and how this peace process goes forward. But sir, you've always said that the eastward expansion of NATO is your real concern. Now, Ukraine hasn't got this NATO membership as of now. My question to you, sir, is NATO expansion the real threat or just a pretext for what you think is a part of Ukraine which is probably you want control over? Or you think that injustice is being done, Russian language was being banned? These were the real issues.
Послушайте,
Well, listen,
НАТО — это отдельная тема.
NATO, well, it's a different topic entirely. Russian culture, Russian language, religion, and even territorial matters. These are all important matters, but these are one thing, whereas NATO is a different thing. And we're not demanding anything exclusive, anything unprecedented. There is a principle according to which the security of one country cannot be ensured at the expense of another country. This is a theory. Well, probably it's obtuse or abstruse, very difficult to understand, but I will explain that in simple terms. They say that any country, even including Ukraine, has the means to choose what means to employ to ensure their security, and we do not deny that right to Ukraine. But the thing is, this security should not be guaranteed at the expense of Russia's security. Ukraine thinks it better to join NATO, whereas we say that if that were the case, it would present a danger to our security. So let's search for a way that will ensure your security on the one hand, but on the other hand is not going to present a threat to us. Moreover, we're not insisting on anything, we're not demanding anything that would be unprecedented or wouldn't have roots in history. We are simply insisting on the promises that have been given to us should be observed. We didn't come up with that yesterday, you know. The thing is, this promise had been given to Russia, to the Soviet Union even, back in the 1990s, not an inch to the east. That is what they said, and after that, there has been several waves of NATO expansion, and right now, and then they came to trying to induct Ukraine into NATO. We're not simply disappointed with that or irritated because, you know, NATO is a military bloc. Article 5, I think, is still very much in place, the Washington Treaty, but no one wants to take our concerns into account. Moreover, when Ukraine gained its independence, very often it's forgotten, but one of the first documents that was adopted when independence was declared was the Declaration of Neutrality. And this is the basis for the current statehood of Ukraine. That is the Declaration of Sovereignty of Ukraine, which states that it's neutral.
Was that also the basis for what happened when you decided to annex Crimea, your only warm water port, a very important strategic port for Russia? And then Russia was no longer a part of G8. Today, the West claims or says that your actions in the recent past is the reason for, and I quote unquote, the isolation of Russia.
Нам не нужно было получать.
You know, we didn't have to get that important port because this port had already belonged to us, basically. Our navy, under treaty with Ukraine, had been stationed at this port in Sevastopol. These are just the facts. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, our navy was still stationed there. Of course, it was important, but you know, the thing is, we didn't annex Crimea, and I would like to underline that. We simply came to help those people who didn't want their future to have anything to do with the people who orchestrated the coup d'etat in Kiev. These people in Crimea said, yes, these nationalists had conducted a coup d'etat in Kiev. Had we been consulted? Well, yes, we ended up, they said, as part of independent Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union. These were just historical facts, very well. But we believe that it's a democratic state. And if a coup d'etat happens in a democratic state and the consequences of that coup unknown, we don't want to live like that. That's the reasoning of the people in Crimea. And there was a threat, not just of pressure, but also that Crimeans would be persecuted, and Russia came to their assistance. And if someone thinks otherwise, thinks that Russia is gonna act in another fashion, then they are very much mistaken. We'll always protect our interests.
Can I, Anjana, just ask one brief question before we move on to the other part? Do you want to go back to being a part of the G8? Because that's a lot. There are a lot of reports on that. So Is that something that Russia is looking at?
Нет.
No.
That's an interesting answer, sir. You're very clear about that.
Да.
Well, yes.
Дело вот в чем. Дело в
The
том,
thing is,
я когда-то так случилось, я сейчас не буду вдаваться в
well,
детали.
I'm not going into detail, but I basically stopped going to these meetings back in the past.
Не очень понятно, почему
That's the first thing. Secondly,
входящие
I can hardly understand why countries of the G7
G7
call themselves G7, you know, in Russia it's called G like for great, big. The thing is, India's economy in purchasing power ranks third. And what about the UK or other countries in terms of purchasing parity
какой 10-й, там я вообще
capacity? I think it's 10th place or something like that. I don't remember.
Конечно, это
But-
все страны с
Yes,
высокотехнологичными.
these countries have a high-tech economy with a very solid foundation, which is still very much there, even though their share and the world economy is
сокращается как
shrinking year in, year out,
тенденция, она такая, какая она есть. Она будет
inexorably. And the trend is there, and it's gonna persist, apparently.
совершенно, ну, как скажем, аккуратненько. На
Well,
мой взгляд,
let's put it mildly. I think this is going to happen due to the erroneous policy pursued by the authorities of many of these countries.
рецессия в Германии очевидно.
Let's have a look at the recession in Germany. It's very much there for the third year in a row. France is in a very difficult spot right now on the brink of recession, and the same applies to other leading European economies. But that said, the G7 is still an important platform. They are working on something, discussing things, making some decisions. Good health to them and all the best. But, you know, at a certain point in time, I simply stopped going to these meetings, and it was not due to developments in Ukraine. These were due to other events, other developments. I'm not going to go into detail right now.
Проинформировали американских наших.
And, you know, we informed our American counterparts on that. And
Sir,
You
very
informed them
interesting.
in this meeting, during this meeting.
Ну, и на этой тоже.
this meeting in particular.
With Mr. Witkoff.
Да, ну, затронули эту тему.
Yes, we mentioned this topic.
Oh, that's a very important aspect to it. But you have visited China.
Вы так думаете? Я не думаю,
Think?
что это так важно.
Well, I don't think that is that important. But if you think so,
Okay, sir. So coming back to, no, I just want to put it in perspective before we go ahead. So you're just telling us that in your recent meeting with Mr. Witkoff, it was offered to you that you could make it back to G8, and you categorically said that you are not interested.
Нет, нет,
Okay, sir.
нет. Просто
No.
возникла эта тема.
no, this topic simply came up. You know, I explained it to Mr. Witkoff why I had stopped visiting G8 meetings in the past.
Предложение.
Well, there was no proposal.
Просто мы
No proposal came, but we simply broached the subject,
вспомнил о том,
and I remembered that point in time when I stopped coming. That was back in 2012,
после выборов
after the presidential elections in the Russian Federation. Then I came at a certain point in time, and then I didn't. Well, it's a platform. Okay, very well, let it work further. But, you know, other big associations are coming up, like BRICS, the SCO,
этих двадцатка.
and the G20 is still active, and we are participating in all of these formats. We don't have any
Какие отношения?
objections against all of that. But, you know, let's have a look at another aspect. What is the current state of affairs in relations between Russia and the EU? They're not normal. So imagine I go to the G8. How am I supposed to be talking to the members of the G8 if they don't want to talk to me? What am I supposed to do there? Well, we'll probably talk about that
Interesting
later.
points you've just made. Number one, you're saying that countries like India, whose growth rate is far exceeding a lot of European countries, need to just calm down and understand how things are moving. The other thing you say is that organizations like probably G7 are losing their relevance, and what do I do there if they don't want to talk to me? But the third thing also you mentioned is BRICS. Now, my question to you, sir, is there a new world order falling in place? Because you're not going to G7, but you just visited China and you're about to visit India. Russia, India, China, BRICS, SCO, Global South. What do you see as the new power center in the multipolar world?
Вы спросили, меняется ли мир?
You've asked whether the world is changing, whether a new world order is,
Течет, все меняется постоянно.
Скорость in the stage of configuration. Well, the thing is, the world is constantly changing. Everything passes, everything changes, but right now the rate of these changes has skyrocketed, and we can feel that, we can see that. I mentioned that before. The thing is, we are witnessing global economic shifts and changes. They are not related to the developments in Ukraine or elsewhere where conflicts are happening. I think we can spend another hour speaking about that. It would give me great pleasure, but unfortunately, your audience, they're going to be bored with our deliberations on the subject. But the fact remains the fact. New centers of development, rapid development, strong development are happening. They are forming in the global south in particular. I refer to South Asia. And not just India, but also Indonesia is on the ascendancy. I think it's almost 300 million people, not 1.5 billion as in India, but still this is a rapidly developing country. The same goes for Africa, which is developing rapidly, and this development is gonna pick up because there are young people living there, and theirs is the future, and they will seek a higher standard of living. So this is inevitable. The rate of changes in the global economy is only going to grow further. Incidentally, we often hear that recently Russia is readjusting, recalibrating its ties with the global south or with Asia. Well,
this picture which we wanted to show the president, because President, sir, this picture actually ruffled a lot of feathers across the world.
The Russia
Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Narendra Modi, 3 nation heads together, and people were going all over social media and America.
But even if we look at that picture, President Sir, how do you have these alternative blocs, and how can they become a real force if there are fundamental unresolved issues between key member states in that bloc?
the thing is, conflicts are always there, they're always present. There was not a point in time where there had been no conflict. Let's have a look at the background of major regions, major centers of the world. Whether you look at any point in history, you will see that there are always questions, always conflicts. The most important thing is, how do you go about finding a solution to the conflict? How do you go about finding the most efficient method of addressing these challenges? Let's take BRICS and other large associations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the thing is, within these organizations, we have a common understanding of what brings us together, and that is our values, traditional values, on the basis of which our civilizations have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And based upon these values handed over to us from previous generations, we're trying to advance and move forward, bringing our efforts together rather than trying to repress these opportunities. And when you pull efforts together, then the end result is based on synergy, and it turns out to be unprecedentedly good, unprecedentedly impressive. And this is what we are prioritizing within these associations and organizations. There was not a single time when we got together to find a way of trying to dupe someone or preventing someone's development. Our agenda is always of a positive nature. And I think this is important.
Okay, so that's an important answer, but are there alternatives? Because the biggest thing when you have these blocks is how do you make it economically viable? Are we looking at alternative payment systems? Is there going to be a BRICS currency? Or are we looking at alternative payments in terms of national currencies? Rupee ruble.
Moving towards de-dollarization, basically.
Вы знаете, никуда не надо спешить.
Well, there's no need for haste.
И тогда не будешь совершать
And
каких-то грубых ошибок.
if there is no hurry, then you will avoid many grave mistakes. Let's have a look at Europe. They created the Euro system and they involved in that Eurozone several countries that were economically unprepared for a single currency. Hence, problems with regulating a number of issues related to social system. You cannot simply work with the national currency because there is one single currency, hence problems with the budget. We do not have this goal of building a single currency in BRICS at this stage and point. This has to be done very carefully, prudently.
And we need to use national currencies. We need to use wider the capacity of the new development bank of BRICS. For example, we've proposed to create a new investment platform that would use electronic payments with a minimum capital of $100 billion to begin with, in order to create conditions for joint investment, both in our economy and the economies of the developing global south. I assume it could be very interesting because these are investments that could foster the growth in the economies of the recipient countries, and that would also benefit us because together with these countries would produce high-quality products at affordable prices that would help develop the global south countries and our development as well. And such payment tools could multiply the modern means of electronics. For example, electronic payment means electronic money exist and they develop at a very fast pace. And this work is not aimed against anyone. This is simply fine-tuning of the tools that already exist in the world.
Before we move on to
What is the roadblock? What is the roadblock in the rupee ruble payment here then?
Здесь нет препятствий. Это вопросы экономического характера. Мы прекрасно понимаем и отдаем себе отчет в том, что у нас есть определенный дисбаланс в торговле. Но, скажем, правительство Индии не вводит ограничения.
There are no obstacles here. These are purely economic issues. We fully understand and realize that we do have a certain trade imbalance. However, India's government does not impose restrictions on our mutual trade. Why? Because they need both oil and petroleum products. The Indian government needs to expand its purchases of Russian fertilizers because these are crucial for Indian farmers. And Prime Minister Modi constantly raises this issue. Please increase the volume of deliveries. The issue is entirely different. It's not about rupees, it's about what those rupees can buy, respectively, for our companies. We're also thinking about this, not only the Indian government, but we also do. And we agree that this disparity must be addressed, but not through bans, rather by finding areas beneficial for both sides. Therefore, during my visit and at our initiative, there will be an exhibition showcasing our importers from India. I want to share with you something completely candidly. This was my direct instruction to the government of Russia, which is to consider what else we could purchase from India. We're considering this matter together, including from the perspective of the Russian Federation.
могли бы закупать в Индии. Мы думаем над этим, причем с обеих сторон, в том числе и со стороны Российской Федерации.
That's an incredible move if it goes forward. My next question to you, sir, before we move to other issues, is how do you balance, I'm going to ask that directly, how do you balance India and China? Because it is very clear that you're keen on good relations with both these countries. How do you balance them? Seeing some tensions between us.
Нам об этом хорошо известно.
We know this very well. India and China are our closest friends. We treasure that relationship deeply, and I do not believe we have the right to interfere in your bilateral relations. But I know that both Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping are committed to finding solutions to all issues, even to the most complex interstate problems. I know about it because both Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping see that some specific tension is rising, and they both try to find solutions to these issues, exerting maximum effort. I know this well, and I can see it clearly. And the key reason why they would succeed would be their wisdom, which we appreciate immensely. At the same time, Russia does not feel entitled to intervene, because these are your bilateral affairs.
И мы этому очень рады, но не считаем себя вправе как-то туда вмешиваться. Это двусторонние отношения.
The next important issue with regard to India, sir, is terrorism. We faced two major terror attacks, one in Pahalgaon and then one in Delhi. My question to you is that we see a dual ideology on terror in the world from different countries. What is the solution in your eyes? Because Russia has also faced terrorism. India faces it. What, in your eyes, is the solution to your terrorist, my freedom fighter ideology?
Все очень просто. Значит, терроризм...
It's very simple. To achieve freedom, we must use lawful means only. Any actions involving criminal methods or those harming people cannot be supported. This has been decided long ago. As you have correctly noted, Russia has repeatedly faced acts of extreme terrorism throughout its recent history. In these matters, India is our full ally, and we completely support India's fight against terrorism.
Жесточайших актов террора. И здесь с Индией мы полные союзники и целиком и полностью поддерживаем Индию в борьбе с терроризмом.
Right. Okay. But there's another country in the neighborhood, very important to Russia, important to India, Afghanistan. You are a very rare country to have recognized the Taliban regime. What made you really look at that as a strategic interest to recognize the Taliban at a time when the world is still saying they have not given equal rights to women, where there are still a lot of issues with Afghanistan actually coming to becoming a country that holds women and men equally, and there are many other human rights issues there.
В каждой стране...
In every country there are enough problems, and Afghanistan is not an exception, considering that for decades this country has been embroiled in a civil war. It's just horrible. But the Taliban clearly controls the situation in Afghanistan, and this is evident. Here's what needs to be said first, and you have to accept it because it's reality. Secondly, what's important to note is that the Afghan government takes many actions to combat terrorism and various terrorist organizations, including ISIL and others like them. This we also know very well. Afghan authorities have significantly reduced opium production in their country and are actively addressing drug threats from within its borders. There are several other important issues here. The main point is that in order to influence events happening in the country, you must stay in contact with the current leadership there. Exactly what we are doing.
Предпринимает активные шаги по сокращению наркоугрозы с территории Афганистана. Есть и некоторые другие обстоятельства. И главное из них заключается в том, что для того, чтобы как-то влиять на происходящий процесс, нужно быть в контакте, нужно работать. Чем мы и занимаемся.
There's
Right,
another flashpoint.
The foreign minister of Afghanistan was in India. This I'm just sharing
Yeah,
a
yeah.
snippet. He was in India, and we weren't allowed. Women weren't allowed to attend the press conference, and we fought back. And then he had to hold a press conference with women as part of that entire delegation. Isn't that interesting? I was just sharing it with you.
Да.
There is truth in what you say, but on the other hand, if he hadn't come here, you wouldn't have had any chance to influence these events at all. And now you've got both connections and the minister who has arrived. You were able to express your reaction to what happened. How do we measure whether that's little or much? It seems to me that at least this is the part of your influence and your partner's influence on the situation. But imagine there were no contacts at all. Then what? Everything remains exactly as before, and nobody, including yourself, would influence anything or express any opinion about this. In contrast, now such an opportunity is available to you. Contacts are better than no contacts at all.
Pushing for change is equally important, as you make a very valid point. The other flashpoint is Gaza. And it is now being known that you, sir, Vladimir Putin, have a new peace plan for Gaza. Trump also has one. What is your Gaza peace plan, and what do you propose, sir?
Мы не предлагаем какого-то особого плана. Мы всегда исходили из того, что...
We don't offer any special plan. We have always believed that the only way to solve the Palestinian problem is by implementing the solutions adopted and considered by the United Nations over many years. And the most important one is establishing an independent Palestinian state. That is the key to resolving all issues.
Okay. The other important issue when you talk about Israel and Gaza that Anjana just did is the fact that the Arab world, when it comes to the issue of Gaza and people of Palestine, did not really do as much as your ally, your friend Iran did. How do you look at this entire scenario where this is a changed world order? We never thought that Iran would fight back for Palestinians more than the Arab world.
Вы знаете, каждый...
Each of these countries, in its way, is concerned about Palestine and the Palestinian people, worrying for them. And each of them tries to contribute in resolving the situation. Some things are obvious, others remain hidden in the shadows. But it doesn't mean that no one is doing anything. This is a complex issue that no one has managed to resolve over the years. Hence, it can't be fixed in just a few months by clicking a button. However, we should aim precisely at achieving this goal, establishing a Palestinian state. What has been done until now was done by President Trump. Naturally, primarily the return of Israeli hostages and Hamas took this step. I think, frankly speaking, this was the most important thing that was done as part of the latest steps for the settlement in Gaza. I believe it would be correct, perhaps, to think about the possibility of organizing the governance in such a way as to transfer all authority to the Palestinians. There are such options. They are being discussed both by Arab countries and the neighbors and beyond it. It's being discussed in the United States as well, I know it. As part of the United Nations, we have always taken part in this process. We will continue to do that with our friends.
Такие варианты есть, такие варианты обсуждаются и арабскими странами, и с соседями, и не только, и в Штатах обсуждается, я знаю. Ну, и мы в рамках Организации Объединенных Наций, мы всегда были участниками этого процесса и продолжим эту работу вместе с нашими друзьями.
Right. President Putin, we've discussed a lot of geopolitics. We'll stick to a bit of that in a while, but let's talk about your journey. You're a man from the intelligence community. How would you rate intelligence agencies today? Which one do you think is the best? I'm sure you'll say Russia, but I'm still saying, which one is the second best then? And how does CIA fare?
Well, there are several powerful intelligence services in the world. There is CIA and our Soviet and Russian intelligence. There is, as it is well known, a very efficient service Mossad, Israeli intelligence. Many countries of the world have tradition of intelligence services. You know, I think it's better not to give evaluation to the efficiency of other people's intelligence. I'm happy with the quality of work of our intelligence service.
Знаете, мне, наверное, лучше не давать оценок эффективности работы чужих разведок. Качеством работы своей я доволен.
Okay, fair. So we would like to, because this is a rare opportunity and we get to interact with you, we want to understand what shaped Vladimir Putin. And as we peep into your early years, we've read a little about your KGB days when you were working in Germany, and then you moved on to St. Petersburg and Moscow, where you worked with Mr. Yeltsin. What actually shaped the man you are today, the leader you are today? Which were the days?
My family, the family that I lived in and that I was born into, my parents, my closest people. I think that everyone is shaped primarily by our closest surroundings. Naturally, the social situation around, the colleagues, and, as you have fairly noted, that work in the intelligence service because it has strict discipline, strict ideology, and primarily has to do with the defense of the interests of motherland. And that was the entire point of the intelligence service of the Soviet Union, and I lived in that system for many years.
Связанная прежде всего с защитой интересов Родины. На это направлена вся работа была советской внешней разведки. И я жил в этой среде много-много лет.
I was watching one of your interviews where I think you were interacting with school children. And one of the children asked you, one girl there asked you, what has been the most shattering experience of your life? And you said, the disintegration of USSR. How did that affect you? And what is your vision of Russia?
It had an impact in the sense that we always need to very carefully look at our every step, and we need to understand the consequences of that. That's number one. Number two, it is very important not only for the former Soviet Union, but it applies also to Russia. What was the conclusion that I came to? It is that the Soviet Union, at a certain point of time, was in such a state that its leadership, and possibly even ordinary citizens, believed that it was so big, so great, that nothing, ever, under any circumstances would happen to it. And this idea of grandeur is the point when a country starts to make one mistake after another, thinking that everything is all right. Yes, we made a mistake here and was a small failure there, but we're so big that it will always pass, we'll survive. And the number of mistakes grows like a snowball and is getting harder to manage that. I see the same as happening with some other countries today. Therefore, I'm keeping an eye.
А количество ошибок нарастает, как снежный ком, и потом с этим очень трудно справляться. Так же происходит, я смотрю, в некоторых других странах мира сегодня. Поэтому я внимательно...
Are you going to name them?
Нет.
Okay, but we go back to USSR, sir, because you talked about how one mistake was rolling into another. Whom do you hold responsible for this situation? I mean, you're talking about people also who thought that probably it'll never happen with us. There'll never be any disintegration. But I'm sure you must have seen the Gorbachev years. You saw how Yeltsin went on. Whom do you hold responsible? What was the phase in which decisively USSR was disintegrating, breaking up?
Здесь я бы не стал сейчас искать виноватых, менее, более виноватых. В целом сложилась такая система.
I would not want to pinpoint the guilty and who is to blame more. In general, it was the system that turned out not to be viable. We need to recognize that and we need to think about it. We should not look for specific culprits, but we need to think how to create a system that will not simply protect itself, but develop. That's the point. And if such system is in place, it would be self-sufficient, autonomous, and effective.
Are you looking at reintegration then?
Интеграцию чего? Советского Союза?
Of the Soviet Union?
Нет, конечно, это просто исключено.
Reintegration of what? of the Soviet Union? No, of course not. That's simply not on the table. We do not have such a goal, and it won't make any sense. There is also a question of rationality. It does not make sense in current circumstances because it would critically change the national and religious composition of the Russian Federation. It does not make sense.
You should tell that to some of the Western papers who keep writing about how you really want the old Soviet Union back, because that's what they keep doing.
Я не буду им говорить, знаете почему? Потому что они все равно не хотят слушать то, что я говорю. Они хотят слушать.
I won't tell it to them. You know why? Because they still do not want to listen to what I'm saying. They want to listen to themselves only, or they want to comment on what I'm saying the way they like it.
Write a lot about saying that you want to build the empire back.
Да, они это делают для того, чтобы напугать свое население. Они злоупотребляют своим...
Yes, they do that in order to scare their population. They abuse their monopoly in the global media. It is called manipulation of the public opinion, and the goal is to justify their aggressive policy towards Russia. I don't see another goal.
Right.
Then if you're different, how would you, Vladimir Putin, summarize Vladimir Putin's life and ideology?
No, I think it is too early for me to summarize my life. I have some work ahead of me.
I like that, because we're going to talk about longevity. But before that, there's a very important question. You're going to India. The prime ministers of India have had a huge role to play in this strengthening of India-Russia ties. Who do you think, in your span of being a leader here in Russia, really made that difference since you were in power in enhancing India-Russia ties? Which are the prime ministers?
Well, you have already asked me to characterize other leaders of other countries. I do not think it is very polite. You know, now we're working with Prime Minister of India, His Excellency Narendra Modi. Indeed, we have very trustworthy and friendly relations. He is a very reliable person. In that sense, I'm speaking very sincerely. India got lucky. He lives India. I'm talking to him and I know him. I hope he won't be cross with me. I'm just saying what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking. It is very pleasant to me to talk to such a person of integrity, you know. And that's number one. Number two, indeed, he is very sincere when it goes about strengthening India-Russian ties across the whole range of areas, especially crucial issues of economy and defense and humanitarian cooperation, development of high-tech. It is very interesting to meet with him. He traveled here, and we sat with him at my residence, and we drank tea for the whole evening, and we discussed different topics. We simply had an interesting conversation, purely like humans. So I'm looking forward to this meeting. I'm sure it will be very interesting and useful.
Rather than not liking it, sir, I'm sure he has this mutual admiration for you as well. Quick question on the future, sir, because AI is a force to reckon with. Your viewpoint on that, do you think it is a force for chaos or it's a force for good? And where is Russia in this AI weapon war that's like in a prep situation world over?
Ну, вы знаете, это так же, как любые достижения прогресса, это может быть и злом, это может быть...
You know, like any other achievement of progress, it can be both good and evil. It is clear that it's cross-cutting technology that changes the life of an ordinary person, and, of course, in the near future, it will change the lives of the whole humanity. Those who will be the first to master this technology, use it most effectively, would gain a tremendous benefit in the economy, in social sphere, in defense, as well as in every sphere, in education, in science, healthcare, everywhere, because the effective use of artificial intelligence in each of the spheres will have a multiplier effect for efficiency and productivity. There are also challenges here, and specialists know it fully well. The fact is that it is all based on the processing major data sets, big data. Here comes personal data of people as well. That's number one. And naturally, we need to take steps to guarantee safety and protection to ensure human rights in the widest sense of the word. But here is yet another very important thing. It is that the people who have these databases, in essence, they can use their capacities, the capacities of the developing technologies, to shape the worldview of people.
Предпринимать необходимые усилия для того, чтобы гарантировать безопасность, гарантировать права человека в самом широком смысле этого слова. Но есть еще одна очень важная вещь. Это те люди, которые обладают вот этими базами данных, они по сути через свои возможности, через возможности развивающихся вот этих технологий могут формировать по сути мировоззрение.
Yeah, because we're talking about the future.
But you're talking about health also, and you just spoke about health. So there was a hot mic moment between you and President Xi Jinping, and it was reported very widely when you spoke about longevity, the strides in medicine, biohacking. Do you think immortality is achievable?
Все конечно.
Everything has an end. Only God is eternal. We can extend longevity of life 100%. I'm sure we can. 77 years ago, average lifespan of a person in India was 31 years, and now it's about 70. That's what healthcare does. In India, infant mortality was cut fourfold. We congratulate you. These are all the results of the healthcare effort, and if you use AI in healthcare and you use it to produce medical drugs, for example, using genetic engineering and so on, that means it would have a tremendous effect. Nevertheless, everything comes to an end.
Используя там генную инженерию и так далее, вот то тогда, конечно, эффект будет просто колоссальный. Но все равно все конечно.
Not hinting at your age, sir, but there have recently been a lot of Gen Z protests across the world. How do you connect with the young generation? And we have a lot of leaders now who are looking younger and younger and younger. How does this happen? And how do you connect with the young people in Russia?
Знаете, здесь нет ничего нового. Ведь и у нас в литературе...
You know, there's nothing new here. In literature and in art, this topic of contradiction of the older generation and the younger generation, of fathers and sons in our classic literature, these images have always existed. Fathers and sons. There is nothing new here. You know what's new? The technology. Those messengers, telegram, and so on. They are used to influence the youth. The younger generation, this generation is more or less the same. Young people are always more mobile, more radical. The younger people, a young person, thinks that they are coming across this injustice and so on, and no one saw it before them. And now they saw it, and they will tell it to everyone around. And they think that these injustices are very easy to deal with. They can be easily solved. And when a person becomes more mature, he or she is trying to change something. It turns out that they start to understand that it's possible to find a solution, but it's not as easy as it seemed at first glance. Therefore, we need to talk with people. We can't just say that you're just young, you don't understand anything, you're just sitting there in your homes. It does not work like that. You need to always keep in touch with young people and to use their tools, their devices of obtaining information, to use feedback, social networks, and so on. You need to work there. And I'm sure that you partly do that. I'd like to wish you every success.
Совсем молодые, вы совсем ничего не понимаете, и вот сидите у себя дома там за стенкой. Так тоже нельзя. Нужно постоянно быть в контакте с молодыми людьми и пользоваться их инструментами, их аппаратом, пользоваться теми же современными средствами доведения информации до них, обратной связи в социальных сетях. Надо там работать. Я так понимаю, что вы отчасти этим и занимаетесь. Хочу вам пожелать успеха.
President, sir, we could have gone on for another hour or so, but we're reaching the fag end of our interaction with you. You just mentioned religion a while ago and the Orthodox Church. A very important aspect. I've traveled to Moscow a few times now, And every time you come here during Christmas, it is unbelievably lit. It's unbelievable to see how beautiful Moscow as a city looks. Anjana's first time. So she was surprised. It's better than any European city. But religion does play a very important role now. How do you see spirituality when it comes to the morality question in leadership, the Russian society, and for you personally?
Ну, это основа. Мы все время, во всяком случае, последнее время, все время обращаемся к нашим традиционным, как мы говорим, ценностям.
Well, that's the foundation. We always turn to our traditional values, as we call them. At least that's what we have been doing lately. This does not mean that we use these traditional values to just sit idly. This is simply the foundation that we feel very solid on. But we need to look forward. Naturally, we need to develop and use all modern means of development. And only with that, using our basic fundamental values and vision of the future, that's the only way to efficiently achieve the goals that we are setting for ourselves. And that's the way we have shaped or formulated our goals, the goals of national development. I would really like our national goals and the goals of India, shaped by Government of India, headed by Prime Minister Modi. I would really hope that they coincide so we could join efforts and achieve maximum results.
Совпадали друг с другом, и чтобы мы, объединяя усилия, добивались максимального результата.
So we welcome you with open hearts to India, and we look forward to whatever comes out of the meetings. But I don't know how much of Hindi films or songs you've ever heard. There's an old song that was very popular in Russia, which actually just means that there's a red cap on the head.
You're wearing a red Russian hat,
Russian hat, but the heart is Indian. And it was very popular even in Russia. A lot of people knew about it. Anything that you want to say to about India, Indian society, Indian culture, and what is your message to all Indians who like you a lot and who would want to listen to what Mr. Putin has to say to Indians?
Вот вы сейчас сказали об индийской культуре.
You just mentioned the Indian culture and the Russian culture. You know, I think that we have a lot of citizens in the Russian Federation also having notion of Indian culture as about a fairy tale, a beautiful, bright, colorful fairy tale. From the time of the Soviet Union, people here like Indian movies and Indian music. I would even say that certain known people from Russian society have a cult of the Indian culture, and I like that very much, because I think that it is, as they say, from heart to heart. We'll be doing everything in our power so that this interest would not lose its spark. I would like people in India to know that.
Есть такой даже в известных слоях нашего общества культ индийской культуры. И мне это очень импонирует, мне очень нравится это, потому что это вот то, что называется от сердца к сердцу идет. И мы будем делать все для того, чтобы этот интерес этот не угасал. И хочу, чтобы в Индии об этом знали.
President Putin, we are very thankful to you for this very open interview that we had with you. And the best part, I think, Geeta, out of this entire interview is that we touched everything we talked about, everything. But this is a bond. The Indo-Russian bond is a friendship that is to be cherished forever. There are seasonal friendships, but there are friendships that last a lifetime. It is a classic, vintage, and let's see what comes out of it. We're very thankful to you for this interview.
Well, that's Vladimir Putin for you, a no-holds-barred interview with Archduke and India Today Network, where he summed up what Russia is. He's saying Russia will not be isolated, will not compromise on her interests, and is not going to go kowtow to the developed world, saying we want to be part of any grouping such as the G8. Thank you so much for joining us. India and the world was watching you.
Thank you so much, sir.